I would never let myself be in a position where the manager could say, you didn't try 100% there. And that was because of a business, so I was first in the training ground, I'd be last to leave. I would make sure that, my attention to detail, everything that I did in preparation, whether it was training or for a game, was immaculate. Any industry is competitive. What a lot of professional footballers and professional athletes, you will accept that, but you don't realize how unique it is that you accept that as the norm. When you realize that, and every time you are crossing that white line and you're aware that the other person on the opposition, sometimes the person in your team, is literally looking to take your shirt away from you. When you actually apply that logic to any industry, you realize what you have experienced in professional football, you will never experience that level of competitiveness again. Being resilient, persevering, being willing to be the best and actually showing up every day is a superpower in the real world.
Thomas, Hal, welcome to the Business of Sport. So great to have you here.
Brilliant. Yeah, pleasure being here. Thank you for having me.
We've literally just talked about it, but football fans will obviously know you as Hal. There's a brand new side to you as well, which is beyond football. I saw a statement that was really interesting when it was talking about you, and it was the intersection of athletic performance and entrepreneurial success. And considering what we do on the show, considering how we talk to a lot of athletes, that really intrigued me. And I just wondered what your relationship was with that statement. How have you been able to make that a reality?
Yeah, no, really good question. I think within any sporting environment, let alone elite professional football, you need to realize that this industry is one of the most competitive industries in the world. However many billion people there are in the world, at one point in time, every boy and now every girl dreams of becoming a professional footballer. And when you look at the Premier League, there's 20 teams, maybe 20 players in the squad at any given time. So that's 400 players out of billions of people who at one point dreamed of having a career in professional football. And so what I realized early on was it's such a competitive and cutthroat industry, but in order to survive and then ultimately flourish, you have to have a certain caliber, a certain mentality, a certain level of perseverance, a willingness to go above and beyond the norm to ultimately stand out and perform. And I think that is within professional football. And when you look at the data in professional football, it's harder to become a professional footballer in the top leagues than it is to get into Oxford or Cambridge. So you are in the 0.0001% of people at any given time in the world. And so my point here is that if you apply that resilience and that determination and that perseverance and that attention to detail, attention to excellence, you can pretty much achieve whatever you want to achieve in any industry. And yeah, that's sort of what I have ultimately applied within the business world of consumer goods, functional wellness. And yeah, that is my sole passion and focus right now.
And that's come to life in Turmeric Co.
Yeah.
What we see right in front of us.
Yeah, indeed. And so, yeah, launched the Turmeric Co in 2018. And it was simply to bring a range of natural, functional turmeric-based shots to market. And I believed, my family believed, it was a homemade recipe, that if we could get this blend into people's hands, we would change a lot of people's lives through natural, raw, functional ingredients. And when you look at society today, when you look at the health of populations around the world, there has never been more disease than there is today. And a big driver of that is our food system. Of course, lifestyle, environment, but what you eat, you do become, right? And that basis is in the nutrient, the density, the quality of the food that you can consume. And yeah, look, there's a lot of different external factors in terms of, quality of food and price points and the economics and the macroeconomics that influence a lot of decisions, which lead the majority of populations to rely on fast food, ultra processed foods. But yeah, we just thought, imagine if we could make this a convenient option that anyone could pick up and consume on a daily basis. And the Turmeric Co was born in 2018.
But it was a personal requirement that it was your experiences of needing something like this.
Yeah, as a 15-year-old, I suffered 2 major surgeries on my knee. Ruptured my anterior cruciate knee ligament in my left knee. 12 months later, ruptured it again and went through a second round of surgeries. So for 2.5 years, I had chronic inflammation in my knee. My knee was constantly swollen. And the physios, doctors and surgeons who had been supporting me through this process, a really traumatic time, basically said, like, you're always going to play with pain, inflammation and swelling. And so as a 17-year-old, sort of 2.5 years post that first surgery and that first injury, I was prescribed anti-inflammatories and painkillers, standard medication by the physios and doctors. And the premise of consuming that was to basically take the edge off the pain. And anyone who plays, professional sports or even lives an active lifestyle will probably have consumed, some of these drugs at one point in time, things like ibuprofen, diclofenac, paracetamol. But as a 17-year-old, within 2 weeks of consuming these drugs, my body just had an adverse reaction to them. So I started passing blood in my urine, severe nausea, couldn't sleep. And so I basically had to stop taking this medication, which was taking the edge off the pain, not dealing with the root cause of the inflammation. But I was still hampered with this chronic swelling and restriction. And so it was at that point in time when my father and I basically began asking, like, there must be a natural way to recover from pain, inflammation and swelling. And we went on a research binge, began looking at various cultures, various practices around the world where anecdotally they used these natural ingredients to reduce all of the symptoms that I was experiencing. And long story short is my father began sourcing all of these raw ingredients that we had identified as, sort of natural anti-inflammatories, natural pain reducers, natural reducers of swelling. And it was things like whole watermelons, whole pomegranates, pineapples, ginger root, and subsequently turmeric root. And you had to have it in like a bioavailable form, which meant, the active compounds were easily absorbed. You had to have it with a fat soluble. So all of this information we were absorbing. And my father basically sourced all of these raw ingredients, turned them into this blend. Looking back now, I was fussy as a teenager, so my dad had to make it taste half decent, and everything that we were reading was around consistent usage. And he eventually turned these raw natural ingredients into this golden elixir. And within 6 weeks of taking it religiously, I was completely pain-free.
Really?
Yeah.
How did people at the club must have been like, what's happened?
Yeah, it was nuts. And I remember waking up, and it was the first time in 2.5 years I'd woken up without any pain or restriction in my knee. Began to play, train again. A year later, I made my first team debut. A year later, I made my international debut with Wales, and then subsequently made my Premier League debut when we got promoted to the Premier League with Reading. And it was such a sort of sea change in my sort of physical state, to the point that, sort of 8 weeks post feeling completely fine, the physio pulled me in and was like, can we ultrasound scan your knee? Basically by this time I had chronic tendinopathy, and if you ultrasound it, you can sort of see the inflammation in the tendons. It sort of flashes up red on this machine. And the physio jumped on, scanned it, and my patella tendon was completely dark.
How was it for you when, you're 15 years old, then you're going through that amount of injuries and severe ones, potentially career ending before your career's properly started? How do you manage to deal with that? Because mentally that must have been incredibly challenging to do.
Yeah, I think like looking back now, like there were sort of episodes in my life that really sort of built resilience. And that sort of injury, that phase of surgeries and trying to recover from them was sort of definitely a pivotal moment for me. And as traumatic and as dark a time as it was, like looking back, it really helped form my mentality. I signed for Reading as a 15-year-old, but I had actually been released by Arsenal in that summer. So I'd been at Arsenal from 10 to 15, Liam Brady was the academy manager at Arsenal and was like, look, you're not really that physical. I was a late developer. He just said, look, we don't think you're going to be physically strong enough to play in this Arsenal first team, so we're going to release you. And so that was a massive setback. So I went from that, a really low point in my life, to then signing for Reading Football Club. Brendan Rodgers was the academy manager. And, he believed that, I could be one of the youngest players at Reading Football Club. So I was getting, sort of fast tracked into training with the reserves, into, sort of the first team as a 15-year-old. And sort of 3 months in to that season, I suffered that major injury, which was a horrific tackle. My left knee basically went beyond my right knee-high challenge. And that was the sort of trigger of realizing, like, nothing ever moves in a straight line, and ultimately, like, how far you go is simply down to, like, your willingness to persevere towards that goal.
How was education for you? You must have picked a lot up. I mean, it's unusual to have someone in football. We talked about stereotypes outside. People do not associate footballers with having these kind of ideas, let alone the ability to follow them through into proper businesses. Have you always thought in this way? Have you always been interested in things beyond the sport?
I've always been a bit of an avid reader. So I was always like researching and always trying to sort of develop my mind, develop, my body, develop obviously the nutrition of what we created. Like it was kind of always in me, but I think applying that into a business world, like it is a step change. And like the big things for me is sort of that first step into a new environment is like always sort of key. And when you look at a lot of professional footballers as an example, there's a lot of bright boys, a lot of intelligent individuals who perform well at school, maybe didn't perform well at school, but still were, had sharp minds, who were able to think quickly, could apply themselves. But from what I found was like footballers tend to accept that stereotype. So rather than thinking outside of the box and being, really individualistic and saying, look, like, I'm actually really interested in this subject, I'm going to pursue it, I'm going to explore, I'm going to develop myself within that area. It's almost like, no, like, we have a game on a Saturday, just focus on that. And so a lot of professional footballers will genuinely just spend so much time playing FIFA, going around the golf course in their spare time. And again, there's nothing wrong with that. But when you look at professional sports, in particularly physically demanding, challenging sports where it's very competitive, such as professional football, you have a finite career. And when you actually realize that typically you'd be coming out of your professional career mid-30s if you're lucky, you've had a decent career for maybe 15 or 20 years. A lot of industries, whether it's doctors or lawyers, like, that's the time your career is just beginning and you're beginning to get momentum. And so there's a lot of anomalies within sport which almost like limit and pigeonhole professional athletes and footballers into being within that industry and within that sport.
Did you stand out in the dressing room? Did you mind? Was this a very different thing for you to be doing? Like, how did you marry it all together, I guess, while also not seeming like the weird kid? Which obviously a lot of people, they never want to feel, or never want to see.
No, I think you'd have to ask my teammates for that, but I think they would.
Who's the best point of reference?
Kieran Gibbs, Matty Phillips, Jake Livermore, Johnny Evans. No, but I think they would definitely say I wasn't maybe the normal one. I would, towards the latter parts of my career, I finished as a 31-year-old, relatively young. My last game was in the Premier League against Leeds, but made a decision to focus full-time and solely on the business. But I think I was always willing to, sort of disclose what I was doing, right? I was actively building a company. I was involved in, a lot of projects around it, from the manufacturing to the marketing to the sales. But like I said, I was passionate about it. And I think that ultimately shone through. And, launching the business in 2018, it almost started as a bit of a side hustle, very much entrepreneurial startup life, but I was still playing professional football at a high level at that moment in time. But what I realized was that as an athlete, you have moments of like real intensity, and typically it's like physically, obviously mentally you need to be prepared and sharp, but a lot of footballers, you'll train between 9 and 10:30, midday maybe, and then it then is about rest and recovery, and that rest and recovery really is physical rest and recovery. So there's nothing stopping you from exploring other areas, stimulating your mind, and that's kind of was my approach to setting up the Turmeric Co alongside playing in the Premier League. And I think we scaled the business relatively quickly from 2018 to 2020, and we could begin to see the tangible impact that our range was having on people's lives, and that kind of gave us more purpose, more passion, and for me, more commitment to really executing.
How important was it that you made that start when you were still playing and didn't wait until the end of your career?
It was massive, and I think, but again, it is so difficult because when you look at professional football in particular, if you were to say to your manager, "Hey, Gaffer, I've just started up this business," his first question is going to be, "Are you ready for the game on the weekend? Are you preparing for training tomorrow?" So I do appreciate the fact of, having core focuses. But like I said, like with me, like I was clear in terms of my commitments and also my capacity to execute. So I would never let myself be in a position where the manager could say, "You didn't try 100% there." And that was because of, a business, so I was first in at the training ground, I'd be last to leave. I would make sure that, my attention to detail, everything that I did in preparation for whether it was training or for a game was immaculate. And so that kind of gave me the ability to say, well, yeah, I'm also doing this and it's growing, it's really interesting, and I'm obviously passionate about it. So I think starting any form of business or being involved in any form of business is key, because what you don't realize as a professional footballer or any professional sports person is you have a massive platform to leverage when you're at that level. And if you try and do it post-career, you realize that the opportunities or the interest that you maybe once had and were exposed to, it's not really there anymore. And so, it's a massive asset to have, but you just need to be prepared to be challenged on your ultimate day job.
Because you had great managers, right? You had Brendan Rodgers, Brian McDermott, Slaven Bilic, really, really great managers, great coaches. When we hear about this kind of thing from athletes, especially anyone that worked under like a Ferguson or whatever it was, it is that, no, your focus is football. That's what we pay you for. That's what you need to do. Making players realize that time that you've just described away from the pitch is available to them and really in their control is a huge opportunity. But I think the hard part of it, from my experience, has been the right people around players helping them understand that that's a possibility. It is rare to have ones that do it off their own back, like you. Is there better education? Is there better support that we can provide the players right now who, as you said, are very, very intelligent in many ways? The opportunities and I guess the opening of that door to start with, to get them to be able to follow some of these careers that they may not realize are open to them.
Yeah, I think there is definitely white space between the professional sporting world and the world of business and opportunity, and closing that gap. For me, having experienced professional football, having experienced all of the various different dynamics of professional sport, I would say a big responsibility does fall on agents, in that opportunity for professional athletes to be involved in businesses. And why I say that is that, a lot of agents ultimately are relatively short-term focused. So it's about, what is that next deal? How much can we leverage out of this next transaction or this next opportunity? And so off the back of that, a lot of that does feed into, how good are you going to be on the weekend? Because if you score an extra goal, we might hit 10 or 15 or 20 goals this season, which actually adds, another 10K onto that next contract per week. And so, for me, a lot of agents don't have that long-term view of, how could we build value for this player in perpetuity? How could we do that? And you can do that, whether it's access to deal flows, exploring, what are the real passions of this young man who has obviously excelled in professional football, which is a, narrow niche. And, typically there's a start and a finish line. You start your career and you finish your career in a relatively short space of time. And so, sort of broadening that view, that lens on, the realization of long-term value is completely missed in professional sport and obviously in professional football. And I think when you look at the agents, there is a massive opportunity for them to actually begin to think long term for players, but they don't.
It's hard, isn't it? It's the incentive structures just right now not aligned to them doing that.
Yeah,
we need to find an environment that enables them to understand that there is some long term value in being able to support a player that way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. And I think outside of that, you then have to take it into your own hands, as sort of I've done, and sort of shown out that actually, if you are passionate about something, you can create value and create opportunity within business.
Do you always have a really kind of positive mindset around it? Was there that belief that you could always do this? You could manage both the playing side and the business side, give everything that you needed to do, meet the expectations of what you would set yourself in a company, and meet the expectations of the managers and the fans and the players around you for the performance?
Yeah, it's not easy. Don't get me wrong. And actually, sort of finishing my career in May 2021, a big driver of deciding to retire essentially at 31 years of age, where I had never felt physically better than I had done at that moment in time. Yeah, I felt unbelievable. Felt great, and had options and opportunities to move clubs and stay in professional football at a very high level. But it was because it was at a point where actually, the business was on a trajectory which, for me would create that long-term realization of quite a big vision, and for me, we now sit in the consumer packaged goods world where a lot of these companies that we're now seeing as our competition, they're the biggest food and beverage businesses in the world. When you walk into a shop and you see a Coca-Cola or a PepsiCo or a Lucozade on shelf, these are big businesses. And yet what we're doing as a functional wellness based brand and manufacturing house, we're beginning to win market share. We're beginning to increase our distribution. We're stealing shelf space off the traditional players of the beverage industry, because, like I said before, there is a demand for wellness, and there is an acceptance now that health and wellness is intrinsically tied to what we consume. And for us, that's our big passion. And in 2021, I was aware that we were sort of moving into a phase where it was going to be a J-curve of growth. There was going to be increases of distribution, increases in demand on what we're doing. And playing in the Premier League as a international footballer, alongside being CEO of, a relatively fast-paced growth business, wasn't that realistic. So I made that decision.
It's a massive jump though to make, isn't it? When you look at as well career and longevity and security for you, your family, everyone around you, when giving up an industry at that time, where if you had the opportunity to play for 2 or 3 more years, the money's great, you're at the top level, to then go and take on the full-time responsibility, retire at 31. How was that when you have those conversations with the people around you?
Yeah, I think But again, anyone sort of who knows me will know that I'm, relatively headstrong in terms of where I want to get to. Like I said, the adversity I went through as a teenager, the surgeon said, you will never play without pain again. I wake up now as a 35-year-old. I can do a squat, I can do a lunge, I could run, a marathon if I chose to. When based on their interpretation of how my body was, that should never have been possible. So I kind of feel like, and this goes for anyone, and it's not just elite professional football, like everyone is constantly overcoming adversity in their life. And if you actually focus in on that and realize that, you begin to, compound, you begin to realize that actually you can overcome challenges, and actually, an issue or a problem is literally just an opportunity in disguise. And if you have that mentality consistently, day in, day out, you're willing to, you embody that, you share that with those around you, you then begin to realize actually you only build a circle of individuals and people who are aligned with that. And so, I think it was no issue at all. And my belief was shared with, by everyone around me.
I guess I ask that in particular because, a lot of the athletes who listen, people we speak to, there's a lot of fear in what comes next. There's the insecurity of life beyond football, because not only is it the only thing professionally you've ever known, but it's probably the only thing that you can remember doing from the training that was required when you were a kid. How do you view what you've been able to bring from that professional sports career as the most valuable, the best things that you've brought into that company that you think were quite unique to what you learned in football?
Yeah, I think I remember coming through Arsenal's academy as a schoolboy. One of the former coaches was a reserve team coach, was Neil Banfield, a legend at Arsenal, internally, everyone respected him massively. He was involved in bringing through a lot of the players there. And he was really closely linked with Pat Rice, who was first team coach at the time as well. And I remember, must have been maybe 12 or 13, and you'd get the opportunity a couple of times a year to go into the Arsenal first team training ground, which is Shenley. So you would experience another level of perfection. It was immaculate. And that was during the era of the Invincibles. And obviously Arsene Wenger was all around attention to detail. And he was probably one of the first individuals and managers who brought nutrition, health, wellness into the sort of mind's eye of the UK, English league, and realized that actually if you looked after your body, your levels of performance could improve. And obviously that's because ultimately you're recovering quicker, you're in better condition, so you can actually work harder, so you get better results. So, but yeah, one thing that I just remember stuck in my head was Pat Rice came over to these sort of 12, 13-year-old young schoolboys. And he was just he was like, how are we doing, boys? It was great to have you here. And he was just, he just went, what all of you need to realize is that when you cross that white line, someone is trying to take your career from you. And everyone was just completely quiet. Obviously we're kids, right? And you're just and I just remember listening, looking up at him and being what? It was the first time that I'd ever sort of perceived that level of competition, that ruthlessness. And he just said when you cross that white line, your life depends on your performance. Every single time. And that was sort of my first awakening to obviously the competitiveness, but the ruthlessness of sport. And so any industry is competitive. There's another podcast out here right now. There's another, firm looking to raise. There's another beverage brand trying to do the next best thing. It is all about competition. And so what a lot of professional footballers, and professional athletes, you will accept that, but you don't realize how unique it is that you accept that as the norm, right? So in order to do what you do, right? And again, we can talk sort of on the mental health side, because I also think that this world that you sort of live in has a lot of ramifications and knock-on effects, which aren't necessarily positive as well. But in terms of the positive aspect of that is that when you realize that you've accepted that as the norm, and every time you are crossing that white line, like you are literally giving your all, and you're aware that the other person on the opposition, sometimes the person in your team, is literally looking to take your shirt away from you every minute of every game, of every day, of every week, of every season, and you still have to turn up and show up again. When you sort of realize that, then when you actually apply that logic to any industry, you realize like what you have experienced in professional football, like you'll never experience that level of competitiveness again. It's still competitive in a different way, but actually if you then apply that same approach to being resilient, persevering, being willing to be the best, and actually showing up every day, like the compounding power of doing those things, like literally showing up every single day is a superpower in the real world. And so, yeah, it's just about applying that.
But before we continue with the show, we want to take an opportunity to thank our sponsor for the show, Revolut Business, the account designed to add efficiency to your business finances. Now, every business hits those big turning points when efficiency is the difference between make or break. Revolut Business makes your finances efficient, helping you manage team expenses, control spend, and expand into new markets, bringing everything you need into one place. Now, we heard on a recent show how Revolut have partnered with Manchester City Women to create cutting-edge partnerships, and I'm delighted to say they haven't stopped there. We've teamed up with them to offer a special offer for our listeners and viewers. And if you're new to Revolut Business, you're in luck. Open a Revolut Business account today using the link in this episode's description, add money to your account, and get a £200 welcome bonus. Pay and get paid globally in over 30 currencies, automate your expenses, set custom card controls, and earn up to 3.51% annual interest paid daily, all on one platform. You'll be ready for whatever's next with this all-in-one account that's designed for efficiency and built for business. Click the link in this episode's description to sign up and get your £200 welcome bonus. This reward is only available until the 7th of July 2025, and T's and C's apply. Now, back to the show. You mentioned there on the mental health side, what you were saying is, you're really building it and you're getting motivated off negative thinking, right? It's someone's going to take my place. Not I'm going to keep my place. It's I have to make sure someone doesn't take my place. That's quite hard for a lot of young people, right? When you're coming in and trying to be the best and find your way, to be building things off negativity, not positivity. I mean, I know it's human nature in many ways, but it's very difficult.
So that was what you begin to realize and accept as the norm. Now, when you realize that, and you're basically realizing that you have to turn up every single day, having that mentality day in and day out, you realize that the drivers for that do not need to be fear-based, right? So they don't need to be based on negativity, based on lack, based on, like we said, the fear. So, but how do you then shift that into a positive of saying like, this is essentially what I want to do. And I accept that I am going to give my best. And actually, regardless of the outcome, I accept it. So you can then sort of have that shift. And I went through this as a young professional footballer, breaking into the first team, all of a sudden playing in front of, tens of thousands of people. It was the advent of social media as I was breaking through. And I remember, we lost 4-1 for Reading, and I was a young kid in the team, and we absolutely got annihilated on social media after, and I'd never seen anything like it. And so you begin to sort of deal with that, and you have to go through that phase of understanding like there are a lot of drivers for motivation, and if you can make the majority of the drivers be based on trusting the process and understanding what the outcome is that you're looking to achieve, by accepting the results and understanding that it then is about the process. And that's what I mean. So when you begin to focus around the perseverance, the application, the commitment to excellence, that is the compounding value. And that's the compounding characteristics that you can then take into any walk of life.
Did you ever raise money for the business?
So we launched the business in 2018, but we came up with the idea in 2016. So we had to set up a manufacturing site in order to get the business off the ground. And so all of that was self-funded. We then had to scale the business relatively quickly. We went from producing 0 shots a week to 15,000 shots a week by 2020, and we actually couldn't produce anymore. And so we then had to go through quite a significant step change in manufacture, right? Like, and again, I'm playing professional football at this time, so it's like, what do we go? Do we go from producing 15,000 shots a week to 25, 50,000 or even 100,000 as sort of that upper capacity? But we believed in obviously what we were doing. Like, we knew that there was an opportunity to create something very unique. And so we eventually went through a significant step change. And our capacity went from being able to produce 15,000 shots a week to a new facility outside of London, which we commissioned. And this was during the time that I obviously finished playing football, because it was a big focus and a massive project. It took about 2.5 years to get set up and commissioned. We eventually commissioned a 20,000 square foot site, got it BRC AA plus manufacturing standard. And we went from being able to produce 15,000 shots a week to being able to produce 1.5 million shots a week. Wow. So it was a massive investment into the future of what we were sort of seeing as an opportunity. And so, yeah, like during that period, that was big investment in terms of resource, time, capital. And so we then went between 2022 and 2024 through a sort of friends and family round, but it was more just, and again, I say friends and family, but it was like a strategic network of who I had built, so relatively experienced, astute investors, but individuals who I knew on a personal level and who could support us with our long-term ambition of the business.
You got to 2022 though, really self-funding, and then I guess through revenue, you were already generating revenue
correct.
Before.
Yeah, correct.
To give an idea, for, again, what it takes and the commitment. So we're talking, 6 figures? How much
investment? 7 figures, for
you.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. Yeah. Mm. So, that's the other side of it, because we can sit here and we can talk about this and we can go, oh, isn't it amazing? And you've done it.
Yeah.
And it is, even more so, because that shows how difficult it is, but also how capital intensive it can be to get to that stage. What is the performance of the company like now? Yeah,
so we've cleared through the 8 revenue figure run rate. And the aim is, we want to get this business to, 100 million revenue in the next 5 to 10 years, so that's the focus, that's the driver, that's the, and obviously that's a revenue figure, but for us, it's about, units distributed, people reached, and ultimately people impacted. And so, like our vision is to be distributing, billions of these units around the world.
How influential are they in sport? Are you in clubs? Are you creating partnerships because of the story that you have and the impact that it had on your career?
Yes, massive. And again, like one thing that we've leveraged really well is that because we're using all raw, fresh, functional ingredients, it's been relatively easy to work with the nutritionalists, the head of performance, because they know it's not a shot based on apple juice or orange juice or water. Like, there is a functional benefit to it. And we have also subsequently run independent clinical studies on our ranges, which is showing a 75% reduction in inflammation, blood marker C-reactive protein when using our range versus not, right? Like a massive improvement in gut permeability, a reduction in average days of sickness from 10 in 1,000 to 5 in 1,000 when using our range. And so when you begin to sort of layer all these pieces in and you look at a really saturated consumer goods market, you realize that there is clear space between what we're doing and the entire category. And so how do we amplify that? And so, myself as a sort of CEO of a business, we employ 75 people. I've just had the opportunity of bringing on board, what I would deem like an A-star leadership team around me. And when you look at the ways of working, like how do you manage, because essentially we have built 2 business models inside of one. So within and without going sort of too off tangent into sort of the retail consumer packaged goods space, but when you look at the majority of brands, particularly startup brands in the consumer packaged goods, fast moving consumer goods market, they are essentially sales and marketing channels. So all they do is focus on sales, focus on marketing, because the product is, for the most part, like a Me Too product. So it's manufactured by a third party manufacturer, and all they do is say, yep, can we have 100,000 of these units, please? Please deliver it by then. And then their sole focus is on sales and marketing, right? And that's what a lot of VCs and, as the businesses get bigger, private equities are used to investing in, because it's just about how quickly can you scale this brand to then realize the value. But we kind of did it the opposite way around. Like, we invested into the manufacturer. So we have had to build a beverage manufacturing business to the highest level of food manufacture. Okay. And then alongside that, we have then created a brand and delivered in sales and marketing around that brand. And so the complexity of running two business models in tandem, aligned with one another, because, you need to make sure you're not creating too much demand, which you can't fulfill, which we experienced early on, but then at the same time, not having enough demand to then fulfill and drive the volume through the manufacturing investment that you've made. So it has been absolutely wild running like this sort of vertically integrated business model. And when you actually look at a lot of the big and successful businesses, they are vertically integrated. So when you get to a certain size, that's what you want to be, because you're able to control product quality, you're able to control distribution. And through distribution, as you increase volume, you get economies of scale, which ultimately allow you to drive profitability into the business to then reinvest back into the growth of the business. And so, yeah, we've done it like a very, very hard way. But the benefit of that now is that we completely own every single product that leaves our business. So we control the quality. We make sure that the blends are exactly to the standard that we want. But then also it means that we can ultimately build the brands within a vertically integrated business. So yeah, like it's, how have we done that? Like as I said, sort of early on, I was always very passionate about self-development, very curious around the mind. Then obviously went into business. So really researched around, running a business, starting up a startup. How do you go from 1 to 5 employees? How do you go from 5 to 10, 10 to 20, 20 to 50? Like, how do you keep scaling while maintaining values and alignment within a group of people aligned to the vision of the business, but ultimately drive traction and accountability, right? Like, how do I know that our, ops manager right now is doing what he's meant to be doing? How do I know our social media head is like delivering on what they're meant to be doing? So
I guess in the same way that you know that your centre back is doing what they need to do to be able to perform on the pitch, precisely. Same way that your winger needs to play
Exactly. So the way that I approached it was, as we sort of went through that early stage sort of growth pains, as we began to expand, we needed to invest more into process, people, systems. I was beginning to realize it's quite difficult to like sort of manage everything, like to organize people and create like real common alignment. And so, I just happened to read a book, and this book was called Traction. Authored Gino Wickman, and he basically was a bit of a serial entrepreneur, set up multiple businesses, and realized that any business, whether it was a service or product business, was based on sort of like 6 core functions. And if you could get those core functions to 80% or stronger, you would get traction, and you could basically like deliver on however complex the business is, whatever the vision is, or how big, hairy and audacious that goal is, like you can move mountains to get there. So he created this philosophy called EOS, Entrepreneurial Operating System. And I read his first book about 5 years ago, and within 6 months I had integrated it into our business. And so now we run our business on Entrepreneurial Operating System, EOS. And that's been a big driver in driving traction into a high growth, high complex, but very exciting and scalable business.
Do you see using sport as a vertical to really prove value? Because I'd imagine I ask you who the target market is, you'll say everyone. Everyone should be having this. Is sport a great incubator for you to be able to show the values that this has, particularly, again, as I've said a few times now, based on what it's been able to do for you?
Without a doubt. And like we've had to, I mentioned earlier, like I've been relentless inside of the business for the last sort of 4 or 5 years, building the infrastructure of what we now have. But this next phase is around building awareness around ultimately the incredible work that we've done. And part of that opportunity is to really accelerate the growth of our ranges now within elite sports. And so, yeah, we currently have over 40 elite sports partnerships, but the opportunity is to have, 200, to have our product used by, tens of thousands of athletes on a daily basis. I think we're probably at around 1,500 right now. And yeah, when you look at all of the big consumer brands, whether they be in beverage or food, the likes of Red Bull, the likes of Lucozade, right? They have leveraged the life out of elite sports. And yeah, ultimately that is a avenue which we will accelerate and will be a big driver in what we're looking to achieve.
That was going to be a question I was going to ask, because it's also a massive issue when you look at a lot of the brands that put a lot of money into top sporting events. You got Olympics, World Cups, McDonald's and Coca-Cola all over them. Even the Red Bulls, health-wise, probably not the most favorable products to be promoting to the audience. Can you compete at that level to be able to go into these major sporting events as a brand front and center without having to change the business model and go to someone and go, we need a crazy marketing budget to be able to do this? That must be a real hard thing to do, to find the right partnerships and also balance the commercial viability.
Yeah, definitely. I think, and I've spoken openly about this, and it's no coincidence, and without again going too off tangent, but upcoming, Q4 of this year, there is an incoming food strategy, which will be led by DEFRA, so fundamentally driven by government. And within this food strategy, they will be tying the productivity of the nation directly to health. Okay. And what they're saying is, if we have a healthier nation, it will mean that we'll have a more productive nation, which ultimately means that we will grow the economy. But what they have also done, which again is, will be groundbreaking, and it's another sign of the direction of travel when it comes to nutrition, health and wellness, is they are also tying the health of the nation to nutrition and food. And the biggest two contributors to nutrition and food is our food industry. So this is going to be like a sea change within retail, consumer goods, and also an understanding that truly whatever you consume, the nutritional quality of that food will have a direct impact on your health. And I think when I look at sort of the wellness industry and nutrition and sort of the food system, legacy food systems, the fast food system that we've come to accept, there's almost like a disconnect where it's like you said earlier, you got McDonald's, main sponsor of national sporting events and associations. You've got Coca-Cola, main sponsors of the biggest global entertainment sports games. And they're allowed front, face and center to communicate their proposition. And ultimately their proposition is nutrient deplete, high in sugar, sometimes high in salt, high in fat, basically not good for you. But they've been allowed to communicate that message to not only the parents and the athletes, but more importantly, to the children. And so it is no coincidence that we all remember that Christmas advert of that massive red van and that song, which is synonymous, holidays are coming, right? Because they tied happiness to their product, even though that consumed consistently and over repeated periods of time, it will make you unhappy because you will lose your health. And so I'll have a Coca-Cola, right? Every now and then.
Yeah, moderation.
Moderation, severe moderation, right? I probably don't have a Coca-Cola anymore, so yeah. But I would used to have a Coca-Cola in moderation, But for these kids and for these families, they're associating this happiness, this brand and marketing with a staple part of their life. And so when you then tie that back to the fact that we have never had more disease, never had more heart disease, never had more, chronic ailments, illnesses than we do in society today. As a civilization as advanced as we are, how is that possible?
Yeah, it's crazy when you think about it as well. When more research, we now know more about how to be healthy than we've probably ever done before, yet we're at our most unhealthy.
Correct. And so the gap in that is, how do you then deliver in an alternative which isn't 10 times the price, which still evokes that emotion of happiness and joy, and can be added conveniently to a, diet or a lifestyle. And so I think that's the gap, which is now ultimately beginning to be filled by products such as the Turmeric Co, other categories across the space. Like, there is a growing awareness and a trend. And yeah, I think it's an important and pivotal time. And that's within our business, like, that's a big driver. We don't talk about it massively openly, but that is a big driver. Like, if we can get our product range, we've serviced 300,000 customers. We've received over 15,000 life-changing customer testimonials. Testimonials that a lot of which we cannot publish because they are talking about chronic, severe ailments and issues, but they have used our range to recover. And so what happens if we reach 1 million, 10 million, 100 million people? Based on that statistic, we're going to have had millions upon millions of life-changing events for good.
I found it incredible when looking at the story because of how young you were when you had the injuries, but you played 425 games for club. You played 46 games for Wales. How many of those did you play with pain, would you say?
Very few.
Very few. And you were told that you'd never play without pain.
Yeah.
So, well, I'm sure, again, you'll say I couldn't directly attribute it. Your work that you did in founding this recipe at the start just for you has been able to completely transform the career that you've had. And you've played that number of games and retired at 31 as well.
Yeah. I felt good.
Which is quite...
yeah, I felt good.
That's quite incredible, though.
Yeah.
It's like an unscientifically proven proof point.
Yeah. I'm grateful for the experiences that I had, and they formed me. But yeah, there were elements that if I had not done, I would not be here today. And a big element of that is nutrition in the form of truly functional turmeric-based shots. And when you look at the market now, there are brands and products out on shelf which still contain that apple juice base, still contain that orange juice base, filtered water added to it. Like, that's tap water. It's nuts, it's crazy, but they're selling it as a functional premium product when actually it is a apple juice shot glorified as a ginger or a turmeric shot. And so again, that's the space that we're in now. But the amazing thing is that people are genuinely having an awakening, and they're saying, look, if I'm gonna invest in my health, I'm gonna take the option to choose a functional product as opposed to the sort of norms that we've all grown up and been accustomed to. I want it to work. I want to feel good. And so the biggest driver for that, when you look at anything functional, is the quality and the ingredients and the processing, right? So to put things in perspective, the majority of juices that you will see in the back of a superstore, okay, any superstore, they have been pasteurized, okay? And pasteurization is heat treatment. So, and why they do that is because that increases the shelf life of the product and actually creates a shelf-stable product at the same time. So that means that rather than having to sell that product within, 6 or 10 weeks, right, reduced supply chain, lots of complexity, they can now sell that product in 52 weeks. And also they can put it into ambient storage, which is 1/10 of the price of cold storage. But when you pasteurize anything natural and nutritious, i.e. a fresh fruit or a fresh functional root, you lose up to 95% of the nutritional value. So you are effectively drinking sugar and water. So this is my viewpoint, like rather than have a apple juice or an orange juice, which is in the chiller, doesn't need to be chilled because it's been pasteurized, and drinking that thinking you're being healthy, you may as well have a Coke.
Yeah.
And, you know, fill your boots while you're at it, and feel that feeling that we had that emotional connection with that advert, you know, 20 years ago. Right. And so that's our big like passion driver, is that there is a massive gap in the market, and we genuinely believe that we're filling it.
You were a really well-known player to people that follow football. You then had a moment in 2016 where you were a really well-known player to a lot of people, even if they hadn't maybe followed football for a long time, when you scored that goal against Belgium and had that incredible run with Wales, which must have been amazing to be a part of. The fanfare after it, I know, was significant. How influential was a moment like that in your career, something so exceptional on an achievement level in the context of what you were doing, to then create this, I guess, brand in addition, this voice around you as a platform to be able to do more people probably, and I'm presuming, so please tell me if I'm wrong, more people were aware of you, more people saw what you were doing, the story comes out, there's more interest that builds around it. And I don't want to attribute it to that one moment, but it must have been a really interesting time for you personally to see that level of identity increase. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, definitely. I think at the time, you know, I was 26 years of age, and yeah, you know, played in the Premier League, played obviously international football prior to that tournament, you know, done relatively well in the career and was enjoying myself. And yeah, like that moment, you kind of went from being recognized by football fans to sort of being recognized by just sort of everyday people, you know, didn't necessarily, you know, tune into, you know, Reading versus Ipswich on the weekend, or, you know, West Bromwich Albion versus, you know, Blackburn. And it was like, it definitely put me on a sort of global stage of awareness, scoring that goal and doing what we collectively did as a nation within that tournament, which was, you know, the most magic element of it all. But yeah, like I think looking back now, you realize that we've accepted that any career is finite, right? So I know there'll be players out there who are 23, 24, and they'll be thinking, I've got, you know, another 15 years, you know, I can just keep going on that. It's going to, like, it is finite. And you realize that probably as you begin to get closer to your late 20s, and all of a sudden, you know, there's talk around, okay, contracts, maximum length being reduced from 4 years to 2 years now for anyone above 28, 29, 30, you know, and so you begin to have that sort of awakening. But one thing that you do realize once you finish playing football is that any career, regardless of how many games you played, you know, you mentioned the games that I played at international club level, how many goals you scored, you know, Ronaldo.
63 for club and 5 for Wales.
Yeah. So regardless of the goals that you scored, and yeah, I was going to give a reference example of Ronaldo, who is, you know, going to break the record without doubt of professional goals. But you realize regardless of all of that, like your career is genuinely made up of moments. Yeah. And like not every player has a moment. And so, yeah, like I said, like I am just, you know,
it must have been amazing.
Yeah, it was unreal.
Have you ever done a Cruyff turn before?
To be honest, like it was my go-to to get out of trouble, but you'd end up doing it, you know, by the corner flag or on a halfway line, and it'd be like, oh, you get a bit of applause from the crowd and then sort of pass it off. But yeah, certainly never done it at that level. And yeah, I don't think
instinct
many could replicate it now. No, yeah. It was just pure in the moment. And Neil Taylor, who was our left back, was literally free in open space, and everyone was expecting me to lay it off to him. And that was when I basically did it. I was like, they're all moving in that direction. So yeah, it was just, a moment of pure instinct.
And how important do you think it is now? You've got everything on the business side. You retired at 31. You've made that call. How important is it for you to stay involved in the world of football to help you continue to develop the things that you're doing away from football?
Yeah, I would say that football and the majority of sports, they are unique industries. And once you're in them, it is a privilege to have had exposure to that. Whether you're a first team professional football player or whether you are a under 16s or under 12s coach at the club, like you probably won't realize how unique it is until it's gone. And so maintaining like the value that you can bring to any sport, I think is really important. And I've sort of challenged myself and sort of struggled with that sort of concept of, maybe I could go into management. I could probably, manage a championship team now, probably get them promoted. You have those thoughts in your head of like, you could build a strong culture. You could be, drive results, understand the game. You've played it since you were 10, 11. So tactically, technically, you know what you want from each position, from each player, from each moment of each game. So you kind of have that idea, but then I think my journey is definitely, on a different trajectory that would allow me to go into professional football as a manager. And when I also look at it, it's like, it is a massive, massive commitment again. And that's the flip side of it, is that for as much free time and for as much value that you get from the game, the adulation, the rewards of being a professional footballer, you also have to sacrifice a lot. For 20 years of my life, I was told where I needed to be, what time I needed to be there, what to do when you got there. And it is relentless, whether it is your son's birthday party or it is Christmas Day and you want to spend an extra hour with your newborn daughter. Not happening. We've got a game on a weekend. We've got a game in 24 hours. Then into, pre-season. And now with all of the Club World Cups and the Nations League, the time frame for players to actually rest and recuperate from intense seasons is insane.
I wanted to ask you your opinions on that, because obviously it's very current. We also had Maheta Malanga on a while ago, who I love. I think is fantastic, and has really tried to do a huge amount for players. And this was probably a year and a half ago when we had him on, and he was looking ahead to the Club World Cup and just going, from a player welfare perspective, everything that you do and your ability to support people, some of them players, with their fitness. How do you think about the calendar at the moment that we have? Because it seems like it does put a huge amount of pressure on the physical capabilities of players.
When you look at football as an industry, you realize it is an industry. So as a professional footballer signed to a club, playing for a national team, you're a commodity. And so how do you maximize that commodity as an association or as a club? It's games. So you realize even more so over the last few years with the uplift of fixtures, a lot of the top players have come out openly and spoken about it. I think most recently last year was Kevin De Bruyne, and he had a massive go, at UEFA, at FIFA, for the amount of games that they're exposed to. Pep Guardiola, another great example. He's a massive openly will talk about the impact that these games have on the welfare of players. And so you look at it from one lens of industry, players are commodities. How do you maximize the commodities? Games, events. So, if you're trying to raise the ceiling, you're trying to drive revenue growth, volume growth, interest, clicks, whatever the metrics are that they're tracking internally, you do more. So you increase it, and that's what they've done. So on the flip side, the other lens is that, as much adulation as professional athletes and professional footballers get, like, they're human beings. They've got feelings, they've got emotions, they've got, struggles. They're physically in demanding careers already. So you kind of begin to look at it and realize that actually for them to continually increase the amount of games that these players have to play, it's an issue.
You're going to have a reduction in quality, right? Because they cannot perform at the top level exactly as we want them to for 75 games a season, which is now what some teams like City and Chelsea could play this year.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is absurd. But like I said, the viewpoint from an industry and commodity perspective, like that is the default mechanism. Let's just do more. I think there'll need to be a lot of pushback, just because the powers that be have so much influence and can, smoke and mirrors, and it's not us, it's them. And so I just think this is the new norm within professional football. But yeah, I think the outcome will be the change in mechanics, as you said, of the rights, the advertisers, and the expectations around having your top players present all of the time. And you've seen, Club World Cup and all of the fixtures. It's a squad. A lot of the squad players will go and feature there. And actually, that's not necessarily who the fans want to see, but that's what they can do. Like, that's the only thing possible, because the player who has been integral all season has played every game all season and physically cannot do any more.
It's hard, isn't it? It's where individuals, now players, are as big as the brands of some of the teams. The pressure is purely on them to be performing, and if they're not, Inter Miami's a very different beast if Messi's not there compared to
massive
if he is.
Yeah.
How did you find media when you did that? When you went into punditry as well, let's say 2021 Euros. Did you enjoy that?
Yeah, I thought it was great. I thought different view, different setup. You sort of see behind the scenes of the media side and that production, which is then obviously delivered into the fans and broadcast. But yeah, I think I found it relatively easy, given that I had played professional football all my life. And that was, sort of everything, every single day. That was what you lived and breathed. So yeah, it was relatively easy to communicate my views on the games and the opportunities and the sort of outcomes of the tournament. And yeah, like, as I said, it's not something which I will be pursuing, massively, simply because of my existing commitments. But yeah, I'm not open to doing more of it in the future.
Did you have training, like a media training?
No. They do offer sort of media training, but I was just like, I'm just going to talk about what I'm seeing. So yeah.
Okay, nice. I mean, just to kind of wrap it all up, next stages then, you're looking to, let's say, hit that 100 million goal, if you use that as a North Star. How do you go about breaking that down into actionable things that you can go, right, okay, today we need to do this?
Yeah, I think it all starts with the vision. So you need to have a vision, and that vision needs to be communicated. It needs to be that North Star. It needs to become the Bible, the reference of everything that you're committed to doing. So be clear on that, have full clarity. Then you need to understand the steps that you need to take to get there. So what does the next 5 years look like? What does the next 3 years look like? What does the next 1 year look like? What does the next 3 months look like? And from there, you need to make sure you have the right people in the right seats. So that's the work. You need to, like you said, we spoke earlier about the setup of a team. What's the centre half doing? What's the striker doing? What do I need from the striker? What do I need from the goalie? I need the goalie to not let it in, first and foremost, right? So being super clear on that. So that's understanding the seats within the organisation, and then you need, A-star players in those seats. You need high agency people around you. You need people where you set the direction and they have the capability and the capacity to take you there. Obviously under your direction, and you're supportive, but actually that they can do it better than you. And I think that's one thing that within the business world I learned the hard way, because I was trying to build a team, trying to really just give everyone opportunities all of the time, right? Like really enthusiastic. But no, like I said, you're in a business world, and you need to strive for excellence. And it's not just excellence on delivery, it's excellence on how you show up. What are the core values that you need to see displayed day in and day out? And if a collective group of high agency people are displaying those core values day in and day out, you ultimately begin to get traction, and you can begin to move. And sometimes, when you look back, you sort of feel, you've moved mountains. Sometimes I look back and don't do it often, but it's like, goodness me, like, how have we done that? Like, that's quite wild. But at the same time, you then are aware that you're just getting started. And so, yeah, I think like that's the sort of the stepping stone, the waterfall of trying to realize a vision. And look, everyone's got a plan, right? Like, how do you need to be adaptable, you need to remain flexible, agile, but yeah, resilient and perseverance. And so, yeah.
Do you find the highs that you got in sport can be matched in business?
Like, scoring a goal in professional football is one of the most insane experiences. Like, in a stadium full of people, full of fans, regardless of the significance of the goal, it is a very, very special moment. Like, same again, keeper keeping a clean sheet, making a save, a last minute save that wins the team, the match. Same as a defender or midfielder making a massive tackle and winning the ball and setting up the winner, whatever it is. Like, there are moments that you cannot physically replicate in any other industry. But for me, it's the impact and the testimonials that we have. So it's like, when we launched into Sainsbury's, surreal moment. Sitting on a Whole Foods or Planet Organics shelf, like, surreal moment. 500 Sainsbury's stores, product sat on shelf. Like, that was the idea that we had, 7-8 years ago, and now it's being consumed at volume and having an impact, right? So those moments are surreal, but like I said, like, the crazy thing for me is when we see a testimonial come in and the customer is like, I was really struggling with this. Like, I had tried XYZ. And yeah, I've had some crazy moments even over the last few weeks. I gave a talk up in Edinburgh at BDO AGM, was sharing my story of the business so far, and gave a talk to about 250 people. And one of the staff at the hotel was in the talk, and afterwards speaking to some of the people, saying thanks, great to be there, really great to share my story. And he basically waited to the very end and came over like quite sheepishly and he was like, sorry, really sorry, I don't mean to disturb you, but I just want to say, like, I had a major surgery 12 months ago and recovery was really bad. Was prescribed, a lot of medication, and that medication actually meant that all of my joints locked up, so I couldn't walk. And he said, I came across the Turmeric Co and I began using it, and I just want to say, like, it completely changed my life. Like, within 3 months, I was able to walk again, I was able to work again, and I was just like, this is insane. And so those moments, in my opinion, sort of supersede the experiences that I had in professional sport.
Powerful. Quick fires. Okay.
Yeah, sure.
Dream partnership for Turmeric Co on the sports side.
Dream partnership.
They'll follow up on it as well.
Yeah. They'll follow up on it. I'll just go for it. Go on, into Miami. Yeah.
Okay, interesting. But that's now, right? For
exactly.
the next year,
yeah,
maybe.
Precisely.
Yeah, it's the hard bit, it's the longevity.
Well, dream partnership, right? You said it. So into Miami.
No, I love it. Athlete's Edge. We always talk about staying fit and healthy. What would you say were like the tips and tricks, if there was anything that you used as a professional that kept you in great nick?
So nutrition, obviously fundamental, lifestyle fundamental, but actually mind is everything. Everything is mind. And so, and that mind is as simple as realizing that actually if I consume something bad for me, it's going to make me feel worse. If I consume something good, then I'm going to feel better. But it all starts with mind. You need to really understand. And so, I would say that internal work is the most powerful work you can do.
What was your favorite part of transitioning from football to business?
Favorite part is setting my own schedule.
Hardest part? Setting your own schedule.
Yeah. I don't know how to do that now. Yeah. So hardest part is understanding the importance of people and being ruthlessly committed to your core values around it.
How would you educate players better to help them understand the opportunities that they have around them?
Network. I think network's massive.
How do you do that?
You need a catalyst. Iron sharpens iron, so does one man that sharpen another, right? It's a fact. If you're hanging around with a certain caliber of individuals, if you're hanging around with people who think a certain way, like, it's going to rub off on you in some way, and that's negative and positive. So yeah, I think network, whether it's through the clubs, whether it's through agents, whether it's organic within the community of professional football. But yeah, I think that's a big opportunity.
Final one, big one. You played for England at like under 19s and 21s. Why did you choose Wales?
Yeah, so my grandmother was Welsh, and so we would always go to Wales, and she always wanted me to play for Wales. And yeah, I kind of got to under 20 levels at England, and Brian Flynn was the youth team manager at Wales, so under 21s coach, and he basically like sat me down. It's a funny story, I won't go into it now, but he got wind that I was Welsh, and at a visit to our training ground, and he literally just sat me down and said, look, like, we all want you to play for Wales. We're building something so special here. There's these players, have you heard of them? Gareth Bale, Aaron Ramsey, Joe Allen. We want you to be part of it, and we're going to create something special. He was like, I know your grandmothers would love for you to be Welsh, and I know you've thought about it. We want you to make that leap. And so, yeah, basically had a conversation internally, and it just felt right. It felt like it was a massive opportunity for me to really deliver that passion that I had within professional football to the nation. And yeah.
Poetic. How was it having a real global superstar around that team in Gareth Bale, who also, by the sounds of it and by the looks of it, integrated himself so effortlessly?
Yeah, it was, he was a massive part of everything that we did. And it was like our remit was to essentially allow Gareth to perform. Like, what could we do to allow him? Because he could do things that no one else on the pitch could do. And yeah, like, he was so humble, one of the boys, and yeah, like, it was an absolute pleasure to have played with him.
Thomas, it's been so great having you here to chat. Thank you so much for coming in, and I'm very excited to get stuck into some of those.
Amazing. Thank you very much. Cheers.
Cheers.